At the edge of an international border, at the edge of the Pacific, at the edge of innovation, community, education, and discovery, you're listening to At the Edge of It All, a University of San Diego podcast where USD experts speak on topics and stories that impact you and the broader community.
Hi, thank you for joining us. I'm Lisette Martinez.
And I'm Elena Gomez, and with us we have Ceranic Salinas. She's the Department Chair of Management, Law, and Ethics at the University of San Diego's Knauss School of Business. Tara, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just dive in a little bit to get some background on your work in business and teaching. How did you get involved in all of that?
So I ended up as a professor of business ethics by a very windy road. I would have never thought in a million years that being a professor was what I would end up doing for my career. My undergraduate is in political science and Latin American studies. I decided to get a master's in international studies at the University of Limerick in Ireland, which was an excellent choice. And while I was there, I got offered a position at a Center for Ethics and Leadership back at the University of Pittsburgh. And I decided that would be a good place to start and figure out what I wanted to do. And absolutely randomly one day, I was asked to teach a recitation section of students. So the really small class for the larger business and society class. And after the first day, I absolutely knew that teaching was what I wanted to do. So it fell into my lap. It was not part of my plan, but I'm so happy that it happened. And I'm starting my 14th year now at the University of San Diego.
Those are always the best stories, right? The winding roads to where you're at now. And we love to ask our guests all the time because every time I meet somebody, I'm like, how did they get to where they're at? Like, what
very
what road?
happy accident.
Well, you know what? And we're here to talk about something that I think is of interest to so many people. You are currently in the process of writing a book on tightroping in the workplace. What is that? I have never heard that word.
I am. Well, you haven't heard it because I made it up to describe a problem that I've noticed happening not just specifically to women, but I wanted to start with women. And so tightroping is this idea that we are constantly modulating our behavior in order to change ourselves or to hide parts of ourselves in order to fit in at work and beyond. So I imagine this kind of somebody up on a tightrope trying to just balance all of these external factors that are pressing down on them.
Now, you said that you saw, a need to kind of describe something like this. Take us through some of the examples or what you were seeing that got you really passionate enough to want to write a book.
So I saw it in myself. First of all, I saw myself doing things at work that had absolutely nothing to do with my job that I changed. So, for example, I have a nose piercing and I used to wear a very teeny tiny stud. And one day I just decided I want to put my nose ring in because having a nose ring doesn't take away my doctorate. It doesn't make me any less smart. And if somebody thinks that it's not professional, I no longer care. And so it wasn't just me doing this, though. Talking to colleagues and friends, we were all sort of monitoring ourselves, rereading those emails 5 times to make sure that the tone that we were sending was just right. Making sure that our clothing was professional and not too casual. We want to make sure that we fit in with everybody else at work. And what I realized is we were all just wasting our time. The time that we were spending on this tightrope is time that we could have been doing literally anything else. And it turns out our male colleagues are not doing that. The idea of checking tone in an email, it's just not something that occurs to them. And so when I looked into the literature, there are things that are sort of adjacent to tightroping. So ideas like impression management and emotion regulation, but it just didn't capture all of the things that I wanted to talk about. So that's how I ended up with this word tightroping. And what I've noticed is that every single time I talk to a woman about it, as soon as I give the definition, their heads start to nod.
Right.
They get it. This is something that we all experience. And so that's just gotten me really fired up to push forward and work on this book while I'm on sabbatical this fall.
And does this have to do with the fact, for example, I remember in high school in my AP courses, or there was a certain class that you went into that taught you, how you should dress for a job interview, how you should speak. That goes back to that. What, is there a difference between being helpful in trying to sort of put your best foot forward and then turning to this?
So I would answer that with a question and ask, who is creating the rules around how you, quote, should be dressing? It's not women. It's usually men. And so the ideas of what proper business behavior is, they weren't made by us in any situation.
Right.
And so it's just the idea that the frameworks that we're in are sort of forcing us to behave in ways that just frankly are not beneficial to us.
So what are you finding in the research then, as far as we kind of talked a little bit about where this may have stemmed from, but where do we go? Is this just sort of your book hoping people can kind of see what's going on and maybe a light bulb goes off, or what can people do to kind of change that?
So there are actually sort of three things that I'm thinking about in terms of how we manage this. The first one is that as women, we need to understand ourselves. And we need to understand the systems in which we operate. So I've broken the book down into, the first section is just called Women. And it's about sort of the society at large and the place that things like the patriarchy and misogyny hold and how they impact our behavior. And then I also think as women, we need to understand our personalities. So there's so much fun, or at least I think it's fun, personality research that I think gives us clues into why we're behaving the way that we're behaving.
Right.
And I'm a really big believer in, once you see the behavior, if you want to change it, there's opportunity for that. So the first step is women understanding why they're doing this in the first place.
And who they are.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit of self-exploration. It's not self-help, though, because I don't think that we necessarily need to change who we are. The whole point is that changing who we are is part of what's wasting our time. So first it's women, and then the second part is work. So the whole second part of the book is all about organizations understanding what these either implicit or explicit signals they're sending are doing to their female employees. And one of the outcomes of all of this is that companies are losing money. They're losing money and they're losing employees. And to me, that's a business problem that a lot of people aren't necessarily talking about. And so the first two parts of the book, I present here's what we need to know. And then the last part is all about how do we fix it. And the way that I'm thinking about this is I'm calling it a multi-party solution. First of all, women can't fix it on their own because frankly, we shouldn't have to. It's not our fault. We didn't create this system. We're just kind of operating within it. And so I think businesses need to do a better job supporting women in general. And in some cases, that may be through diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that are legitimately implemented and created to benefit women. And then the other part is us as women ourselves. We have to be a little bit more of a leader from wherever we are in the organization. So I'm not talking about you have to be a woman who runs a team of 10 people. I mean, lead from wherever you are. Make the choice to change tiny things that you are tightroping and see what happens. One of the things I was thinking about is if this is something that women start talking about, maybe small groups of women can decide to stop tightroping together, form a pod or a squad or a safety net of some sort that allows you to sort of experiment with this idea of, okay, tomorrow we're going to dress down. Let's see what happens. Baby steps.
Yeah.
What immediately comes to mind is the pandemic. How many of us were working from home in our stretch pants that I love? And honestly, I was just as productive as when we've got to dress up for the office, when I was listening to you speak about we're just as successful regardless of what we're wearing or what we look like. You are totally right about that, right? I feel like a lot of women and men too, during that pandemic kind of made choices and decisions, and we're able to see, just the work output and what you are worth as a person and what you bring to the table than just the appearance, right?
Well, and the pandemic shifted so much of this conversation. Before the pandemic, companies had been saying for years, we can't have you work from home. That will never work. People will be unmotivated. Nothing will happen. And magically, over the span of 3 weeks, essentially everyone went remote. Mm-hmm. So these massive shifts are possible. So there were great things that happened in workplaces as a result of the pandemic. But the flip side of that is how many women left the workforce.
Right.
And so the McKinsey study that I was looking at said that over 2 million women left the workforce, and they were disproportionately women of color and mothers.
Right.
And if you were a mom, your departure from work was linked to how old your children were.
Absolutely.
Which totally makes sense. Yeah. When you are trying to manage a full-time job and
a toddler.
Zoom school, it's not fun. And so now what's happening is that men are going back to work after this great resignation, and women aren't. They are not recovering the number of jobs. And it's not clear if that's because organizations aren't offering us what we need, which I think is completely plausible, or if it's just that the world isn't back to normal. Mm-hmm. So there are still a lot of other things that women are managing that fall under sort of emotional responsibilities or caregiver responsibilities that simply have not been put on the plates of men, and it's disproportionately affecting us.
I wonder, in the research that you did, if you also talked to men about this and what their perception was, and even women, like, did they understand what this meant, or that they were even doing it? Earlier when you mentioned, get together as women and realize, make small changes, I wonder if many of them even know.
So that's a great question, and many people don't realize they're doing it because we are so ingrained in the culture. I'm actually deploying a survey next week that is specifically for men, because the men that I have talked to, when I talk about tightroping, they don't know that it happens. And so then the question becomes, well, if they don't know we're tightroping, why are we doing this? Mm-hmm. But I did survey women specifically, and I asked over 200 women, if you stopped doing this tightroping behavior, if you stopped trying to hide parts of yourself, to tamper yourself down at work, what could you gain? And their responses were absolutely shocking. I was so floored by some of them. So I just want to read you some of the things that they said. So one woman said she wouldn't have any more shame at work. Another one said that she would be empowered, that she would have freedom from the mental load. Others mentioned that they would have more time for developing skills, that they would have more time to think creatively. And they also talked a lot about authenticity. And so seeing all these responses, right, over 200 women in this spreadsheet saying, I'm doing this and it is affecting me and it's affecting my work, really sort of stuck with me. And so taking what the women are saying and then adding in the men's perspective, I think is going to be really interesting. Absolutely. To be able to counterbalance those.
Because I wonder if any men are doing it too. There may be social norms that they feel they have to conform to.
There is, I want to be really clear that I'm focusing on women in this book because I'm a woman. Correct. I want to speak from my own experiences. But tightroping isn't something that just women do. It's something that any underrepresented group is having to do at work in order to fit in. So it may be somebody where English isn't their first language, or somebody who's a member of the LGBTQ community. So this isn't just women. And in the survey, I list about 15 different identities that people have to try and get at what part of you is making you feel like you have to tightrope.
And I think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about diversity, equity, and inclusion, correct? At the end of the day, I've always felt like when somebody is hired, it should be because they bring something to the table, their uniqueness, their set of skills that they possess themselves, bring something, add something to the company, to the organization. And it's so beautiful when you really accept, right? When you really want diversity, equity, and be inclusive in the workplace. And I think that all falls into what you're saying.
It does. And the thing that's a shame about a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs is that they're for show. They're a box that gets checked, they're a program that gets put up on the website, and they aren't fully implemented. And so you're exactly correct. All of these unique experiences, this is what organizations are losing every time a woman leaves. And that's bad for business. The idea that you're not really fully integrating half of the population in the way that your organization is making decisions, I think is just a massive mistake. And there's a business opportunity to do better at this.
How much of it, when you asked women these questions, was it sort of internal? These are dialogues they're having in their head. And we talked a little bit about self-exploration, kind of looking internally and seeing if you're doing this now that you know what tightroping is. Or how much of it was it when you come to work, you're actually, you don't feel like you can be your authentic self. You sort of are not accepted.
So some of it is internal. It's those personality components that I was talking about earlier, but a lot of it is external. And companies send signals to employees, for better or worse, about how they think you should behave. So there's this concept in psychology called priming, where you kind of get somebody to do something by putting very not obvious clues around them. So the kind of signage that an organization has, the way that they talk to employees, this all gives you clues about what is expected of you. And a lot of times there are sanctions for not following along. Maybe you don't get invited to the company happy hour with some of your male colleagues, right? Like there are ways that it sort of plays out. So it's definitely partially internal, which is why I'm advocating for a little bit of self-exploration, but it's also external. And there are tweaks that companies can make to their corporate culture that fix that. But if they don't know it's a problem, that's not going to be very high on their priority list right now.
Yeah. And just before we go, what would be sort of one tip you have for a company and also a tip for a woman to have that authentic work experience?
Or a man even. I mean,
yeah, right. Anyone feeling
or anyone,
like
actually, we don't have to use just women, men, it's anybody in the workplace that you come into contact with. How can we make it a better
and you don't
place?
feel like you can be authentic there.
Right. So a lot of that is going to come from corporate culture, from their messaging, but them actually following through on it. So if you're talking about diversity being important and being a welcoming environment, and you say, give a lunch to employees, the CEO needs to be there. There needs to be that face time and effort put in by upper level management to say, this is important to us. It goes beyond just posting it on our website. And I think when it comes to other people being authentic, part of what we need to do is call out what I see as these false narratives, especially around women at work. So there are all these stories people like to say about how women are, particularly to each other at work. There's the queen bee syndrome. There's the idea that they're so catty. And I just don't think that's true. I think women are exceptionally supportive of other women, and those narratives serve to further our need to tightrope. So really publicly calling out these sorts of stereotypes, it's awkward, but I think it's really valuable. And it's things like that that are going to create that culture shift. So essentially, it's got to come from the top, and it's got to come from within the organization. So that's that multi-party solution I'm talking about. We can all decide tomorrow, I'm going to stop tightroping. But if the company isn't part of that solution, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And then I think the last thing is, because I know a lot of times I talk about tightroping, if I talk to men that are older who don't really see this happening, well, then the thing that you need to go to is, this is impacting your business. You are losing money and you are losing talent, and that doesn't work for you anymore. So how are you going to shift that? What resources are you willing to expend to fix this problem?
Well, this is all very, very interesting. If people want to know more about this, I know you're in the midst of writing this book. Where should they go?
Sure. I'm actually going to post a lot of links to the research that I used for this, but you can go to my website. It's terasalinas.com, or you can always email me. My email address here at USD is Tara, T-A-R-A, @sandiego.edu. I'd love to chat about your tightroping experiences.
Well, thank you for joining us. And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to catch our next one.